So today I want to talk about some weird books. As Lewis Carroll said, I'm not strange, weird, off, nor crazy. My reality is just different from yours. And what I like about books that could be deemed as being a bit weird is they often provide a different perspective on things. And I also like weird books because I think there is something that feels quite truthful about them. Because I think if we were all honest, we would all probably agree that we don't really know what's going on. And so when you read a weird book, it's quite cathartic for the book to just be a bit ridiculous. And so I've collected 10 weird books that I've read, and I've put them in order from like weird to like really, really weird. Then coming in at number 10, we have Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. Now, I'm sure a child could read this book and think, okay, a nice children's book. But for me, this book always felt like a bit of a horror book when I was a child. I found it really unsettling and unnerving, and something oddly captivating about it as well, which I think is maybe why it stood the test of time. I think really the story is an allegory for adolescence. You know, Alice goes really small and then gets really big. She opens and shuts like a telescope, I believe is how it's described. And I suppose there is a certain element of horror in regards to puberty. And I just found it really scary when she gets too big to go out that door and she's like trapped in the room and she's too big to leave. I think probably because I'm a bit claustrophobic, my childhood self was like, no, that is the source of nightmares. And I always found the Mad Hatter a bit oddly frightening as well, because I guess I interpreted as a child a Mad Hatter as like a fun character, but he always seemed a little sad and depressed. And I think the reason this book is so popular and has stood the test of time is because people read it or watch it and they understand it even though it doesn't make sense, which is really cool for a book to do. Number 9 is Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. I love Neil Gaiman, what a great writer. His books are comforting for me, even though some of them I suppose are also a bit dark. And Ocean at the End of the Lane is all about childhood memories, and I suppose that topic can always lead itself a bit to weirdness, because childhood is a bit weird. You arrive on this planet and you grow up and you learn things and you try to make sense of it all. When does it really make sense? And this book is infused with magical realism. There is a part in it which is sort of scarred on my mind. I read this book, God, it has to be like many years ago now, and there is this part where there is like an insect under the skin, and the character is picking at the insect, trying to get it to come out, and then it comes out, and the description was so fantastic that the scene felt really visceral. Like I felt like I was experiencing that, and yeah, that's a bit weird. Next we have The Water Cure by Sophie Mackintosh. I read this book this summer actually, and I read it because I saw it recommended on a few different weird book lists, and it is a book about these 3 sisters who live on this island, and their father has recently died and they're left with their mother, and no one else lives on this island. It's just the 3 sisters and the mother, and there's a mystery running through it as to why these 3 sisters are here. Is their mother really their mother? What is going on in the outside world? And I love books like that because I love trying to figure out the mystery behind what is going on. And this book has been compared to The Handmaid's Tale, and I'm not sure I really get the comparison. I suppose you could interpret the story as being dystopian, but it's not really like The Handmaid's Tale. I feel like that was a bit of a marketing ploy, which, you know, you gotta sell those books. Next we have Pretend I'm Dead, and this book's weird. This book is about a woman called Mona, and she works as a cleaner, and the book is quite episodic in that I think there's 4 parts to it, which are all a bit different from each other, but each part follows Mona. And in the first part, we are introduced to Mona, and she falls in love with a drug addict, and their relationship, although it is a bit weird, is actually quite sweet. I think you're not really meant to like either characters, but you can understand their relationship and how they found solace with each other. And I really enjoyed that part of the book. I think after that part, the first quarter of the book was finished with, I was less engaged with the story. I would have really liked it if that was like the whole of the book. And I think if you like unhinged female protagonists, this is one to read. Then we have Metamorphosis, and I like it when a writer takes quite a simple idea but really explores it to full capacity. So if you looked at this book on the surface, you would say it's a book about a man who turns into an insect. But there are so many other interpretations you can have off the back of that. I think the main one is that the insect is a metaphor for mental illness. You know, his family shut him away and he finds it harder to connect with human beings. And yeah, I think there's a reason it's such a well-known piece of literature. Then we have The Vegetarian by Han Kang. I believe she just won the Nobel Prize, which I think is deserving. I can't say I necessarily enjoyed this book, but it definitely left an impression on me, and I'm really glad that I read it. It's about a woman who decides to stop eating meat, but we never really hear from her perspective. We hear from 3 other perspectives and how they interpret her decision to stop eating meat. So we hear from her husband, who is not a nice guy. We hear from her brother-in-law, and we also hear from her sister. And the protagonist's decision to stop eating meat really is like a metaphor for mental illness. It's a metaphor for her depression. So I quite like how the book explored other people's thoughts on someone else's mental health, because the characters have quite wrong and quite harmful reactions, and they're not particularly empathetic at all. And so I suppose in a way the book is also exploring empathy and why we shouldn't act like these characters are acting, because they don't really know what she's going through. They don't really know her mind. They're not taking the time to get to know her. Then we have All Fours by Miranda July. This is a new book that came out this year. I made a review on this book that I put on my channel because I had a lot of thoughts after reading it, and there was something very addictive about this book. You know, sometimes when you read a book, you get into it like once you start reading a few pages, but for me, I was really keen to read this every evening when I sat down to read. And it's about this woman who is married, she has a child, and she decides to drive to New York. And on her way to New York, she stops off fairly soon into the journey at this motel, and then she decides to redesign the motel room because she wants to exert her free will. And I love that concept because I think it's so easy to forget that you actually have free will. You're alive, you can do anything you want. And so I really loved how Miranda July explored that in a fun, offbeat way. And the protagonist also becomes quite obsessed with a man who works at a Hertz garage. And I think really why I like this book is the main character is so honest with the reader. She doesn't really hide anything. She's just like, these are my internal thoughts, my intrusive thoughts. Here you go. You don't have to like me, but I'm going to tell you everything that I'm thinking. Then we have Lapvona by Ottesha Moshfegh. Now, I made a video about the 4 Ottesha Moshfegh novels that I've read, and this was my least favourite. And I could have put any of her novels on this list really, but I just wanted to put one, and I've chosen Lapvona, which may seem weird as it's my least favourite, but I put it on this list because I would say it's the most weird out of all her books. And this book is about a fictional medieval society town called Lapvona, and it follows a series of characters who are all really not that likeable. I can understand why someone would like it, but for me it was just too weird. Like, it was just really too weird. Sometimes books maybe just are too weird for you, and there wasn't a lot that I could hold on to. And you know, I read for fun primarily, and I read a lot in the evenings after I've had a long day. And I was listening to this on audiobook, and I would listen to like an hour of it every night, and I was just like, I don't know if this is really filling my soul with like happiness after a long day at work. So that's my perspective on it. But it is very weird, and if you like weird books, give it a go. Then the second most weird book I've read is Bunny by Mona Awad. This book is about a girl who goes to university and she studies writing, and there are these other girls in her year who call themselves bunnies, and they each call each other Bunny, and they're a bit of a cult, and it's about the protagonist slowly becoming more involved in their world. And I don't want to spoil anything because I think really the joy of this book for me was reading it and like seeing the story unfold. I was flabbergasted at one point at what occurred, and I would say I prefer weird books that are somewhat grounded in reality, like where I can understand what is going on. This book is a bit different to that. It's a bit more metaphorical, so there will probably be parts while reading the book where you're like, oh, what is actually happening? Now that can be great because it leaves you open to your own interpretations, but sometimes while reading I was a bit like, what is happening? This is just weird. Then finally, the weirdest book I've ever read, and I don't think anything is ever going to top this. This is the weirdest book. This is the one. And it is Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. Now, the last 50 pages of this had me like with my hand on my head in just complete like bewilderment. I couldn't believe what was actually happening, because I actually got quite connected to the main character in this book, because when she's young, she goes through something very traumatic, and I think it causes you to feel a lot of empathy for her as a character. And then what happens is that when she's an adult, she decides that she's not a human. She thinks that she's actually an alien. And in order to prove to herself that she's an alien, she tries to do things that are so far away from what any human would do that, you know, it proves she's an alien. And those things that she decides to do are just really, really weird. And I guess really, for me, I thought the point of this book is to see how far you can take a novel into the realm of weirdness. So those are some weird books. Please let me know if you've read any of these and what your thoughts are. I would say that all of them are worth reading, even the ones that I didn't like so much. I would say still give them a go. And what could you add to this list? Do you have anything? And where would you put it in the list? Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye bye.